Now, Chris and Snoop, in my eyes, are arguably the two most misunderstood characters on The Wire, as a lot of people seem to be under the impression that these two are nothing more than just one-dimensional murdering psychopaths, which, as I'm going to be proving to you in this video, is just far from the case, starting with Chris Partlow, or otherwise known as Zombie Master. Now, a lot of videos I've watched, and a lot of comments I've read, the majority of Wire fans seem to be under the impression that Chris is just a cold-blooded murderer, which is true. However, just like everybody else, Chris has his reasons, starting with his fealty to his king, Marlowe.
Chris, tell our people to tool up. I'm on it.
Now, before I delve into this point, I just want to theorise something with you all that might help in understanding why Chris is so loyal to Marlowe, which is that, though never explicitly stated in the show, I believe Chris to have served some time in the military, and the reason I believe this is because of three things. One is that when Chris is ordered to take out a target, rather than simply just turning up to wherever said target is, having a quick look around, and then getting into a shootout like all of the other players, Chris actually operates these highly sophisticated stealth missions by turning up to a scene an hour or two before, as he wants to properly survey the area he's going to be in, and all that could possibly go wrong, which is actually the main reason as to why you'll rarely ever see Chris in any sort of danger, as intelligent killers like he and Omar know, a good night's work is simply just one shot to the head, and only ever do you get into a shootout once something has gone seriously wrong due to your improper surveillance of the target. Now, two is the way that Chris dresses and acts when on a job, which is always very serious and professional, and unlike many other players, never materialistic, hence why he's able to go undercover in the court and steal documents without anybody suspecting him, which any other player just wouldn't be able to do, simply because of how they dress. See, a man who has served time in the military tends to take whatever duties they're given very, very seriously, because in that world, if one is given a task, which they fail to complete, then they're usually punished, which over time drills into a soldier's head a sort of discipline, where rarely ever will they fail to do what is asked of them. And the final reason as to why I believe Chris to have served some time in the military is because of just how loyal he is to Marlowe, and all of the orders that he makes. As most of you already know, one of a soldier's primary duties is to carry out the orders of their king or sergeant, no matter their personal beliefs, hence why you'll rarely ever see Chris questioning one of Marlowe's orders, once they've been made, as this idea of obeying your superior no matter what they ask is one of the primary beliefs that are drilled into a soldier's mind on day one, hence why Chris is never hesitant when given an order by Marlowe, no matter how wicked or sadistic. See, a man like Chris, one that's very serious and honourable, when he swears loyalty to a person, or idea, you best believe that he's going to die by that loyalty, because if he doesn't, then in his mind, and all of those who believe in this sort of military leadership mindset, all he is a selfish coward. Now, the reason I've used the word selfish is because Chris's reason for joining Marlowe was not made in an attempt to better his own life, or for the love of the game, but to better the life of his family. And this is why Chris is so easily able to sacrifice his own life, by spending it all in jail, and letting Marlowe walk free, as Chris knows that his family is going to be well compensated, and looked after for the remainder of their years alive, similar to how the Barksdale crew looked after Naaman and Delonda, and this in my eyes is arguably the most selfless decision made on the show, one that no truly evil man would be capable of committing. As mentioned in my last video, evil isn't the act itself, but the reasoning behind it, and Chris's reason is an unquestionably honourable one.
I don't know about that voodoo shit, man, but Chris is definitely doing something. Get a nigga to walk up and not knowing he about to get cat, man.
Chris, he different, and you can tell by them cool-ass country clothes that nigga be wearing.
See, now, the reason as to why a lot of people have the opinion they have about Chris is for one simple reason, and this is that because Chris isn't given the most of screen time, and therefore giving us as a viewer not much to go off regarding his personal life, we decide to base our opinion off Chris, off of a more morally commendable character's perception of him, such as Naaman's or Michael's. However, what all of us, including the boys, don't seem to take into account is that a soldier's reputation is nothing more than that of a reflection of his king's decisions, meaning that the cruel and cold-blooded decisions Marlowe makes aren't so much pinned onto Marlowe, so much as they are onto Chris and Snoop, seeing as though those two are the ones actually committing these crimes, instead of Marlowe himself, who's just given them the target. Now, despite what I mentioned earlier, there are actually occasions where Chris will openly object to some of Marlowe's cold-blooded decisions, such as the murder of Junebug and his family.
To get on a tit, he passed. Then we bang on his corners a couple of times till he fold.
Now you talking.
Yeah. Next, we stepped to Junebug for talking that shit. He was a dead man when he opened his mouth. He just walking around not knowing it.
See, this scene is one of the only moments where we're actually subtly shown some of Chris's emotions and limits. And what we learn in this scene is two things. One is that Chris actually commends the idea of not murdering first by forcing Franklin to bend a little, rather than just simply snatching him from this world. And two is that Chris isn't necessarily behind the idea of murdering a man just because he slighted your king's name, hence why Chris's face remains stoic when Marlowe issues a death sentence on Junebug and his entire family. Now, to an extent you can kind of justify this act from Marlowe's point of view, seeing as though any slight to his name could quite easily topple the foundation of the empire he's trying to build. However, this is nonetheless still an exceptionally evil act, which despite carrying out, Chris doesn't necessarily agree with, seeing as though there's no real value in murdering Junebug, which perfectly brings me on to my next point. Now, the majority of Chris's actions throughout the show, no matter how perverted or sadistic, all fall under the banality of evil, which for those who don't know what it is, or haven't seen my previous video, I'll read the description of it again here. The banality of evil, which is the philosophy behind the question, can one do evil without being evil? Now, this was the question that New York reporter Henao Arendt grappled with regarding the war crimes trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi operative responsible for organising the transportation of over 1 million Jews and others to various concentration camps in support of the Nazis' final solution. Now, to the naked eye, one may have already made their assumptions regarding this man, based on his actions. Perhaps you've envisioned him to be very similar to that of Hitler, a man who many people want to believe is a true incarnation of absolute evil, but rather just a man whose horrifying deeds are actually distinctly human in character. And this was the same assumption that New York reporter Henao Arendt came to when awaiting Eichmann's arrival. However, as described in her report, Arendt actually found Eichmann rather ordinary and a bland bureaucrat who, in her words, were neither perverted or sadistic, but terrifyingly normal. A man who acted without any motive other than to advance his career in the Nazi bureaucracy, describing Eichmann as no amoral monster, but simply just a man performing evil deeds without any evil intentions. Now, if this sounds familiar, that's because all of what I've just gone over, besides the point mentioned a moment ago, and another crime I'll cover in a minute, can perfectly be described onto Chris, as Chris never commits an evil act because he was driven to by evil intentions, but rather only commits the horrifying acts he does because of the loyalty he's sworn to a man who orders him to do so. Hence why you'll see Chris attempt to comfort those who he's murdering, as never is it personal, but simply just business.
Chris, no!
You know, I keep it quick, Dre.
Here?
Here's good.
Not in the vacant.
What's the difference?
The difference is my people, they won't know.
Don't know.
But the rats, I'll be alone with the rats.
Alright. I got your back.
Chris, let me do it in my house, so my people, they can get me.
Now, whilst one may argue Chris to actually be held accountable for his actions, seeing as though he is a fully functioning adult, this is a valid point, as Chris does understand that the crimes he's committing are ones that are evil in nature, hence him reacting the way he does when ordered to take out Junebug. However, what I need you all to understand is that once a soldier swears loyalty to his king, if he's a man of his word, then no matter how wicked the order, he'll carry it out.
Boys, you like fucking them?
Man, I like pussy. All right, booty. I'm living with a woman now.
She got kids.
I ain't touching kids. Who told you that?
I know what you're saying. But when you're in the inside, ain't no pussy.
Well, yeah, shit. You been inside. Man gotta bust his nut, know what I'm saying?
I do.
Now, this one's a tricky one, and is actually the only time in the show where Chris to an extent disobeys an order, as he doesn't hide the body of Michael's dad in the house, jeopardising the entirety of Marlowe's operation. However, we're not here to discuss that, so much as we are the actual morality behind the murder itself, and whether or not Chris brutally beating this man to death could be considered evil or justified, as this is the only time in the show where Chris commits a murder on his own accord. And what I mean by this is, despite being given the go-ahead by Michael, Chris was only meant to keep it quick and clean, just like all the rest. However, because of what this heinous man did to Michael, and because of Chris's own past traumas, he decides to viciously kick this man's head in, until he's no more. Now, whether or not you can justify the murder of a child rapist, you have to admit that the way in which Chris went about this was horrifying, even to the point where the cold-hearted Snoop was even a little taken back. However, that being said, simply because of who this man was, and because Chris as a child was also molested, I don't consider this to be an any more evil crime than the dozen others he's committed, as this man was a terrible human being who needed to be removed from this earth. And whilst one may argue all of the other people Chris had killed to have not deserved it, including the innocent delivery lady Chris shot, as mentioned prior, Chris never killed any of these people because of reasons driven by wickedness or malevolence, but simply because he was ordered to do so, meaning that despite Chris's cold-bloodedness and lack of empathy for others, he isn't as evil as a lot of you Wire fans make him out to be, but rather just a loyal soldier, serving under a cruel king. Anyway people, that's the end of the video. I know the introduction may have sounded like I was also going to cover Snoop, which I originally was. However, the script I written, I just don't feel like I did her character enough justice in comparison to what I wrote for Chris. But I will eventually down the line cover her in another video. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe and turn on post notifications. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.